The torch's flame flickered as the warrior raised his sword, not an ordinary blade, but one forged to kill without mercy. The air around him vibrated as if the night itself feared that weapon. Then, with a single blow, the steel pierced shield, leather and bone as if they were paper, leaving a trail of terrifying silence on the battlefield. The enemy fell, bewildered by what had struck him. That was only one of the 15 deadliest blades ever created by human hands. Weapons so perfect and so brutal that they changed the fate of entire empires. Throughout history, empires have risen, kings have been crowned, and entire civilizations have vanished because of decisions made in the shadow of a blade. Long before firearms dominated the battlefield, iron forged by fire was the ultimate language of power. The difference between life and death, conquest and fall, reign or be forgotten, often depended on the skill of a blacksmith and the precision of a warrior. But among all the swords, knives, spears, and blades ever created, some have transcended the simple purpose of cutting. They have become legendary not for their beauty, but for their absolute lethality. Weapons capable of cutting through armor as if it were dry leaves, blades so sharp they could split a hair in midair, tools of war that did more than just win battles, defined eras. From the katana that made enemies fall before they even understood the blow, to the khopesh that dominated ancient Egypt, from the kukri that terrorized battlefields to the Viking swords that carried the weight of 1,000 invasions, each blade on this list carries more than steel. It carries blood, history, and the brutal signature of humanity in its most primitive form. These are not ordinary weapons. They are not decorative pieces. These are not legends invented in taverns. These are the 15 deadliest blades ever forged. Tools that shaped kingdoms, defined borders, claimed lives, and left scars that spanned centuries. Weapons so feared that they are still studied, revered, and, in some cases, kept secret to this day. Prepare to enter a world where steel spoke louder than kings, where a single blow could change the fate of thousands, and where each forge created not a weapon, but an eternal echo in history. If you enjoy delving into the secrets of legendary weapons, forgotten battles, and blades that change the world, subscribe to the Blades and Shadows channel. Leave a like, share, and comment which blade you think is the most deadly. The story continues, and you won't want to be left out of the shadows. Long before the idea of a sword existed, the first warriors wielded sharpened stones attached to wooden handles. They were rustic, fragile, improvised weapons. They served more for survival than for domination. But everything changed when an ancient people discovered that stone could be replaced, that the world hid a material far more powerful, far more malleable, far more dangerous. These people had no name. They left no written records, but they left something even more remarkable. Humanity's first deadly blade. She wasn't pretty. It wasn't symmetrical. It had no adornments, inscriptions, or polished shine. It was just raw iron, heated in primitive furnaces until it turned red like lava. Then it was beaten repeatedly, forcefully, angrily, desperately, until it took on an irregular, crooked shape, but extremely sharp. The archaeologists named it the feral blade. It was short, heavy, almost too primitive, but it had something that no previous weapon possessed: the ability to break bones like dry branches. When held, it conveyed an almost animalistic brutality to the warrior. When used against an enemy, it left deep scars that could only be described as pure savagery. This rudimentary blade, born from fire, stone, and chaos, ushered in something that would change history forever. The idea that the metal could kill efficiently, and that whoever mastered this knowledge would dominate all other men. The feral blade does not appear in films. It is not featured in famous museums, but she paved the way for everything that would come after. Katanas, Viking swords, falcatas, kukris, khopesh, all of these descend from that first and brutal object of war. And so begins our journey through the 15 deadliest blades the world has ever seen. Centuries after the feral blade paved the way for organized violence, a civilization on the banks of the Nile would transform the raw metal into something far more sophisticated and infinitely more deadly. At the height of ancient Egypt, when kings were treated as gods and battles decided the fate of entire deserts, a weapon emerged whose form seemed to defy everything that had existed until then. It wasn't straight. It wasn't curved like a regular sword. It wasn't a machete. nor an axe. It was something unique, something impossible to ignore. The kopesh, the curved blade that combined sword, scythe, and axe into a single blow. Its strange shape had a brutal purpose. The cut began with a regular blade, but ended with an aggressive curve that gripped armor, shields, necks, and limbs. By pulling, the warrior would throw the enemy off balance, or tear off parts that he would never recover. Kopesh was not created for honorable duels. It was created for master. In the hands of the Egyptian troops, it became a symbol of absolute authority. In the hands of the royal guards, it became an instrument of execution. In the hands of the pharaohs, especially warriors like Ramses II, it became legend. There are accounts of battles where Egyptian soldiers cut through enemy shields as if they were fabric. Artifacts found in tombs show blades with the perfect curvature to pierce rib bones and pull the enemy closer, leaving them vulnerable. When archaeologists found kopeshis preserved in royal tombs, they realized something terrifying. Some blades were decorated, but others were clearly weapons of war, with deep battle scars, dried blood, impacts, cracks on the edge. These objects were not symbols. They were tools of death. The kopesh remains one of the most devastating blades in human history, and it marked the transition from primitive warfare to organized military combat. And he is just the beginning of the weapons that shaped entire civilizations. While the kopesh reigned in the desert, on the other side of the world, a silent, disciplined people obsessed with perfection transformed steel forging into a sacred art. In feudal Japan, where every detail carried spirituality and every blow had philosophical weight, a blade was born that transcended the status of a weapon to become myth, a katana. There is no other sword in the world that has accumulated so many exaggerations, legends, and impossible stories. But even when we filter out the fantasy, something remains that is frighteningly real. The katana was indeed one of the most lethal blades ever created by humankind. The secret? It wasn't magic. Era science, layers, temperature, good molecular pattern. While most swords had steel of uniform hardness, the katana was constructed with two hearts, a flexible core to absorb impact, and an absurdly hard and sharp outer layer. It's as if each blade carries a microcosm of yin and yang, gentleness and brutality working together. The katana strike was not just a cut. It was a fluid, precise, deadly movement. The philosophy of drawing and cutting in a single motion, transformed seconds into fractions of a second. Before the enemy even realized what was happening, he was already wounded or dead. Historical accounts describe katanas splitting helmets, shields, and even bodies in two with single blows. It wasn't brute force. Era engineering combined with technology. Samurai treated this blade as an extension of the soul. Blacksmiths treated their creation as a divine ritual. And enemies, after confronting her, treated her as something to be feared, even after death. The katana has shaped more than just battles. It shaped the very spirit of Japan, a weapon so iconic that even today it remains synonymous with absolute precision. But even this masterpiece doesn't dominate the story on its own. There is another blade that was born in icy mountains, forged to survive storms, invasions, and raging seas, and wielded by warriors who lived to plunder, conquer, and die with honor. She's coming. While samurai were perfecting the art of cutting, people were shaping steel for another purpose: to win through impact, resistance, and terror. In the frozen lands of the north, where the wind cut sharper than metal, and the sea was as constant an enemy as the neighboring kingdoms, a blade emerged that would accompany warriors from their youth to their grave. A espada Viking, also known as ofBlades in its most legendary form. This blade was not as refined as the katana. It was not ceremonial like the kopesh. She was brutal, direct, and resilient, just like the people who wielded her. What made the Viking sword so deadly? Strength, weight, balance, and it's a steel that was way ahead of its time. The blacksmiths of the north mastered a type of metallurgy that would only be understood centuries later. A steel with a low impurity content, extremely resistant, capable of maintaining a sharp edge even after piercing shields, bones, and chainmail. During battles, it wasn't just used for cutting, it was designed for broken limbs, split shields, break through lines of defense, and to forcefully cut a path through enemy formations with devastating force. But the most impressive detail wasn't in the blade. and not in what it represented. The sword was buried with its owner, not out of superstition, but because it was part of him, an extension of your life, your honor, your ferocity. Some ofBlades found by archaeologists still retain their thread almost intact, even after 1,000 years underground. Proof that these blacksmiths created something that bordered on the impossible for its time. When a Viking landed on an unknown shore, the glint of that sword was more than just a warning. It was a sentence. But the world didn't belong solely to brute combat. While the Vikings advanced in waves of steel, another people in the southern mountains were creating a smaller blade, but one so sharp, so fast, and so treacherous that it would become one of the most feared weapons among elite warriors. She wasn't big, but it was devastating. While Viking swords were tearing through shields on distant shores, in the mountains of Nepal, one of the most feared and respected blades in military history was being born. A weapon so effective that it is still used in modern special operations. The kukri. It's not a sword, it's not a machete, it's not an axe. It's something unique, a deadly hybrid created by Gurkhas, legendary warriors known for their unwavering courage, fierce discipline, and a reputation that made enemies abandon the field before the fight even began. The kukri's shape is unmistakable, a wide blade with a forward curve that concentrates weight at the tip. This detail changes everything. The blow is not just a cut, it is an axe fall combined with the speed of a knife. When a Gurkha advanced with a kukri in hand, the downward strike would shatter bones, muscles, and light armor with absurd ease. Historical accounts say that the impact was so strong that soldiers could fall before they even realized they had been hit. But what placed the kukri among the deadliest blades in history was not just its raw power, it was her versatility. A single kukri could, cutting wood to clear a path through the jungle, break armor, fighting at close range, and serve as a survival tool. It was a blade made for real war, not for parades or ceremonies. There are stories of Gurkhas who, surrounded and at a huge disadvantage, took down multiple enemies simply by mastering this weapon. The kukri seemed to transform men into storms. And even today, in the training of Nepalese special forces and allied units, the kukri remains present because no technology has replaced the original form of this brutal blade. But while the kukri dominated the mountains, another weapon emerged in dense forests and distant villages, a blade so light and swift that it could sever before the enemy could blink, a symbol of ancient kingdoms, dense jungles, and fierce hand-to-hand combat. And she's coming. While the kukri terrorized remote mountains in another corner of the world, amidst tropical jungles, dense vegetation, and warrior villages, emerged a blade that not only killed, but it opened paths, created routes, toppled empires, and sustained revolutions. The machete. Simple, direct, cruel when necessary. The machete originated as an agricultural tool, a long, straight, or slightly curved blade with weight distributed at the tip. But it only took a single tribal war for its true potential to be revealed. Unlike thin, fragile, or ceremonial swords, the machete did not require much maintenance. It didn't break easily. It didn't get stuck in the sheath. And above all, no need for complex training. Any warrior, young, old, peasant, or soldier, could wield it with devastating effect. In the African and Central American jungles, it became the most feared weapon in hand-to-hand combat. The machete's sideways strike could sever limbs with frightening ease. Its broad blade created deep wounds that modern soldiers still describe as almost impossible to treat. Therefore, it was used in tribal battles, peasant revolts, colonial wars, guerrilla conflicts, and direct clashes where the distance between enemies was measured in centimeters. The machete is so deadly that even today, many armies and paramilitary groups retain it as a last resort weapon. It doesn't freeze. No ammunition is needed. It doesn't leave survivors easily. But beyond all that, the machete represents something essential in the history of blades. The idea that a weapon doesn't need to be elegant to be effective. You just need to complete your mission. And while the machete dominated jungles and revolts, another blade emerged in the Islamic world. A weapon as iconic as the katana, as elegant as it is deadly, and so curved that it seemed to defy physics itself. A blade wielded by swift knights, vast kingdoms, and empires that swept across continents. It's about to be added to the list. While the machete tore through jungles and Revolt's, an elegant, almost poetic blade, was taking shape on the vast plains of the Middle East and North Africa. Born amidst dunes, bazaars, fortresses, and endless caravans, it would become the trademark of knights who crossed the desert with the speed of the wind. A scimitar. Few blades in history have had such a sharp, long, and fluid curve, and that curve changed everything. While European swords relied on strength and impact, the scimitar relied on speed and movement. Its inner edge, wide and sharp, allowed for cuts so smooth that accounts describe limbs being severed as if the warrior had cut through water. But what made this blade truly deadly was the combination of weapon and horse. A knight wielding a scimitar, advancing at full speed, using the animal's own weight as additional force. It produced cuts that were impossible to block, even for reinforced shields. It was a blade created for invade, chase, surprise, and finish off enemies before they even understand the attack. In many Islamic cultures, the scimitar was not just a weapon, a symbol of status, honor, and military power. Generals wore it in parades, sultans displayed it in royal audiences, and warriors wielded it in battles that shaped borders for centuries. Its historical impact is so great that its design inspired other legendary blades, such as the Persian shamshir and the Indian talwar, and they all had something in common: the perfect curve to cut through with the very energy of movement, turning the coup into a violent, lethal, and inevitable dance. While knights brandished scimitars in the hot desert wind, another blade, much smaller, much more compact, and infinitely more treacherous, was used in dark alleys, silent backstreets, and political assassinations that would change thrones. A blade that has never faced open battle, but who killed more kings than entire armies. And she comes next. While armies crossed deserts wielding gleaming scimitars, in the shadows of the cities grew a much more discreet weapon, yet infinitely more dangerous. She did not lead battles. She did not inspire troops. She didn't raise any flags. It was used for only one thing: kill the right person at the right time without witnesses. The assassin's dagger, known by dozens of names throughout the centuries, but always with the same deadly function. Unlike majestic swords, this dagger was not displayed. It wasn't decorated. It was not used in public rituals. He was carried where no one would see, inside, sleeves, under cloaks, sewn into belts, hidden between folds of clothing, or disguised as an ordinary object. What made the assassin's dagger so lethal? Its unique purpose. He didn't need to blockade. He didn't need to intimidate. He didn't need to survive long wars. He needed to go in and out, quickly, clean, necessary. Kings were overthrown by him. Ministers disappeared because of him. Advisors, generals, diplomats, and even heirs to the throne fell beneath a blade only a few centimeters thick. The technique was always the same: silent approach, distraction at the exact moment, short strike, minimum cut, deep drilling. Many of these daggers had different shapes, some as wide as a snake's tongue, others as thin as needles, some curved to enter under the ribs and reach vital organs with more precision. Secret societies in the Middle East, India, and medieval Europe perfected this type of weapon to the point of transforming it into the greatest political terror of their time. One sword could defeat an army, but a murderous dagger could destroy an entire kingdom, stemming from the heart of a single man. And while that dagger silently changed history, another blade emerged in the Mediterranean, a weapon so balanced, so precise, and so deadly that even gladiators and legionaries feared to face it. It was not used for stealth attacks. She was made to kill, facing in seconds. Get ready for the next one. While silent daggers felled kings, a completely different blade echoed across the battlefields of the Mediterranean, a weapon so brutal, so efficient, and so respected that even the mighty Roman Empire feared it. A stride, originating in the Iberian Peninsula and used by Celtic tribes and Iberian warriors, the falcata was one of the most ingenious blades ever created. Its shape seemed strange to anyone who had never seen it before. A downward curve, more aggressive than that of an axe, and a tip designed to pierce like a spear. This combination, impossible to understand at first glance, was precisely what made it deadly. The falcata concentrated an absurd amount of weight in the area of the cut, generating an impact capable of to break Roman shields, to break bronze helmets, to amputate limbs, and take down trained soldiers with a single blow. It was not an elegant sword. It wasn't light. It wasn't refined. Era pure violence in metal form. When the Romans advanced to conquer the tribes of Hispania, they expected to find disorganized warriors armed with rudimentary spears. What they found were men advancing, shouting like hurricanes, wielding falcatas capable of turning entire formations into chaos. There are accounts of battles in which trained legionnaires had their phalanxes broken in seconds, not by greater numbers, but by the brutality of the curved blade. Over time, the falcata's reputation became so terrifying that even Roman writers reluctantly admitted that it was one of the few weapons that truly instilled fear in the legion's soldiers. It was a blade created not for dueling, but to destroy, to break shields, for crushing skulls, to carve a path through men as if they were clay. Meanwhile, another weapon was emerging in distant kingdoms, a hybrid between a sword and an axe, with an even bolder curve, a blade used by warriors who fought not for glory, but for survival. And she's next on the list. While the falcata earned the respect and terror of the Romans, a similar yet even more refined weapon was dividing the battlefield in the Greek world. It was wielded by hoplites, cavalrymen, and elite warriors who trained from childhood to fight with discipline, precision, and absolute brutality. The copy. Similar to the falcata, but more elegant in its proportions, the kopis combined short range, devastating impact, and a downward slash capable of crushing bones and taking down fully armed enemies. His greatest strength lay in dynamics of the coup. The weight concentrated at the front of the blade created an effect similar to that of an axe, allowing the warrior to break shields, to strike the collarbones and shoulders with destructive force, cut off limbs, and finish off opponents even behind metal shields. But unlike heavy weapons that required brute force, the kopis was surprisingly balanced. It allowed for quick, fluid strikes and continuous movements, almost an aggressive and calculated dance. Engravings and sculptures from ancient Greece show warriors raising the kopis into the air, not as a sword, but like unavoidable instrument, designed to end any fight with 2 or 3 precise blows. It is said that even Alexander the Great preferred the kopis to the traditional straight sword, precisely because he knew that, on the battlefield, the most efficient weapon is the one that takes down an enemy with the least effort, and kopis did it perfectly. But while the Mediterranean world was impressed by curved and destructive blades, another weapon emerged in a land of organized legions and iron discipline. A shorter, simpler blade, but so deadly that it redefined hand-to-hand combat for centuries. It is known as the blade that civilized through violence, shaped empires, and transformed ordinary soldiers into war machines. And she's coming now. While the kopis was tearing through shields with downward blows, in Rome a completely different blade was being born. Smaller, simpler, more discreet, but so precise and lethal that it would become the most powerful military symbol in history. The sword. Unlike the long, curved swords used by other peoples, the gladius was not created for elegant duels, nor for sweeping, dramatic blows. It was designed to do only one thing, and to do it better than any weapon before it: drill. In Roman formation, each soldier advanced protected by a shield, keeping the enemy at bay. And when the opponent finally approached, expecting a horizontal strike, the legionary, hidden behind living walls of wood and iron, took a beat, stepped forward, and he plunged the gladius directly between the ribs. The blade was as short as it needed to be, not to impress, not to intimidate, but forkle fast. Deep punctures, short, precise, almost surgical blows. A weapon designed for efficiency, not for show. And that is precisely why gladius spread terror across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. He transformed combat into a simple mathematical equation: an orderly formation, plus dozens of small blades piercing simultaneously, armies collapsing. Ancient accounts describe legionaries who, after bloody battles, could still use their blades, proof of the brutal effectiveness of this otherwise compact weapon. But what's most frightening is that Gladius wasn't acting alone. He was part of a perfect military machine. Large shields, closed formations, absolute discipline, and synchronized attacks. The Gladius was not a single-use weapon, era a system of war. And while Rome conquered continents with short, cruel blows, another blade emerged in North Africa, a curved, heavy weapon so brutal it seemed to have been forged for the god of war himself. A blade that cut like a scimitar, crushed like an axe, and terrified like no other. She's coming now. While the gladius pierced empires with mathematical discipline, in the vibrant lands of India arose a blade that obeyed no logic. It obeyed fury, movement, and ferocious precision. A curved weapon, elegant, yet brutal at the same time. A hybrid between a sword, a scimitar, and a guillotine, the talwar. Instantly recognizable by its firm curve and circular guard that completely protected the hilt, the talwar was the blade of the Rajas, Maratha warriors, Sikhs, and soldiers who fought not only for territory, but for honor, faith, and identity. The secret of talwar lay in two things. 1. The perfect curve for devastating downward strikes. Unlike the scimitar, which had a smooth curve, the talwar had a more rigid curve, concentrating force at the exact point of the blade. This allowed for cuts so deep that reports say he could pierce bones from the collarbone to the rib cage in a single blow. 2. The guard is closed. While European swords had simple guards, the talwar encircled the warrior's hand, allowing for a firmer grip and the delivery of extremely aggressive blows without the risk of losing the weapon. And if the katana was known for its precision, and falcata for brutality, talwar was known for absolute impact. War chronicles recount knights advancing with talwars raised like divine scythes, tearing through entire formations, and leaving bloody trails so terrifying that many enemies retreated before even the first contact. But talwar also had a spiritual aspect. Some warriors treated it as an extension of their own soul, engraving prayers and symbols on the blade, believing it carried divine protection, or eternal damnation for whoever dared to confront it. And while the talwar cut its way through centuries of conflict, another blade emerged in the ports, ships, and battlefields of the old world. A short, curved weapon, but so fast and so deadly that it would become the finishing blow of sailors, pirates, and hand-to-hand combatants. She was not a noblewoman. It wasn't ceremonial. It was pure survival, and it's coming. While the talwar tore through battlefields on land, at the very edge of the known world, in ships, docks, turbulent harbors, and endless storms, a blade forged for the brutality of the sea emerged. Unpredictable, swift, and inevitable. The cutlass, the sword of sailors, pirates, and privateers. Short enough to be used in tight spaces, such as narrow decks and ship corridors. Curved enough to deliver devastating cuts with quick strikes. Robust enough to block, trap, strike, and even break wood when necessary. The cutlass was not a weapon of honor. It was a weapon of absolute survival. The seas did not forgive hesitation. When two ships approached each other, the fighting wasn't between organized formations. It was pure chaos. Bodies colliding, ropes, masts, cannons, smoke, blood, and rain mixed together in an insane whirlwind. In that environment, longswords were useless. Delicate, fragile, or ceremonial weapons simply did not survive. The cutlass, on the other hand, reigned supreme. It allowed him to block, cut, pierce, push, and even snatch weapons from the hands of his enemies. And its broad blade created deep wounds that, on dirty ships without proper medical treatment, almost always proved fatal. Sailors trained with cutlass not just to kill, but they had to do it quickly before the ship itself decided to devour them as it fell. But what truly placed the cutlass among the deadliest blades in history was the way it changed entire battles, in pirate approaches, in naval warfare, in crew mutinies, in colonial explorations, and even in impromptu duels on deck. He became a symbol of authority, brutality, and dominance over maritime chaos. And while the cutlass was cutting its way across the seven seas, a far older and more mystical blade was celebrating a silent return, a weapon made not for soldiers, but for priests, kings, and executioners of primitive civilizations. A blade that pioneered the idea of ritual, sacrifice, and divine power in metal. Get ready. The next weapon not only killed, she defined beliefs. While the cutlass reigned supreme on the seas, in the distant lands of Mesoamerica, there existed a blade so ancient, so brutal, and so deeply connected to spirituality that its purpose went far beyond war. She didn't just kill, she fed deities. The macuahuitl, the weapon of the Aztec warriors. At first glance, the macuahuitl appeared to be just a large piece of wood, but its edges were inlaid with blades of obsidian, a black volcanic glass capable of achieving such an extreme level of sharpness that even modern surgeons are impressed. This combination, fortified wood plus obsidian teeth, created an absolutely unique weapon. It didn't cut like a sword. She tore. He was closing. It shattered. In combat, the macuahuitl could inflict wounds so deep that Spanish soldiers reported seeing horses decapitated with well-placed blows. That's no exaggeration. Obsidian is one of the sharpest substances on the planet, much sharper than medieval steel. But the true power of this weapon lay in its cultural context. For Aztec warriors, fighting was not just a matter of military victory. It was part of a religious cycle. The gods demanded blood, vital energy, lives. And the macuahuitl was the tool that allowed capturing enemies with devastating wounds, however, not immediately lethal, perfect for later rituals. It was a blade that balanced destruction and capture, violence and spiritual purpose, pain and religiosity. With the macuahuitl, the battlefield became an altar, and each blow was a chant to the gods of war. But the world was about to change, and the arrival of the European conquerors, with firearms and steel, swords, would mark the end of this legendary weapon. Nevertheless, the fear that macuahuitl inspired still resonates today. And with that, we reach the threshold of the final blade of this journey. A weapon so powerful, so mysterious, and so legendary that it continues to challenge archaeologists, master blacksmiths, and historians to this day. A blade whose name is synonymous with perfection, myth, and brutality. The blade that concludes our ranking. Of all the weapons ever forged by humankind, none inspires as much fascination, mystery, and reverence as it. A blade that seems alive, that shines like moving water. How short it is if you ignore the laws of physics. And it carries with it stories of epic battles, bloody reigns, and secrets lost in time. A Damascus steel sword. Damascus was not just a city, it was a legend in metallurgy. Centuries before modern technology, blacksmiths in the Middle East mastered a forging process so complex, so secret, and so advanced that even today science has not been able to perfectly reproduce its results. Damascus steel was famous for three things. 1. Her hypnotic beauty, wavy lines, fluid patterns, as if the blade were made of hardened water. 2. Its absurd flexibility. Reports say that some swords could be bent until their tips touched without breaking, and then they would return to their original shape. 3. Its unparalleled thread, so sharp it could cut silk in midair, so strong it could break European blades, so lethal that it became synonymous with invincibility. Medieval knights feared this weapon, entire kingdoms paid fortunes for it, and elite assassins called it the blade that chooses who lives. The most impressive thing? The original formula for Damascus steel got lost forever. Neither archaeologists, nor modern blacksmiths, nor scientific experiments have been able to recover the exact method of these ancestral masters. The secret died with them. What remained was the myth, and a few swords preserved in museums, still sharp despite centuries of existence. The Sword of Damascus is not just a deadly weapon. It is one of the greatest works of art ever created by humankind. And that's why it's at the top of our ranking. If this journey through history's deadliest blades has captivated you this far, so you are officially part of the Shadows. Subscribe to the Blades and Shadows channel. Leave a like to strengthen our brotherhood. Comment which blade you'd like to see in a full episode. And share this video with someone who loves brutal history and legendary weapons. More secrets, more weapons, more stories, and more shadows await you in the next video. Because here, each blade carries a destiny.